No. And I guess that's the good part because they may not agree. So they can come up with however many that they want. And that's, that again, that's back to us about how many folks we're going to put up there. Because believe me, if we don't put our kind of folks up there that are going to be committed, accountable, then the other folks are going to put their people in. Simple as that.
Yes.
Okay.
Just real quick, I did give a copy of my suggestion for Neighbor Green, who's also on the board with Tony French, who's going to look at this today. But just looking at your bill, only people, as it is written, who can serve on the board are people who work in the private sector department, because you exclude people who work in the public from the city or the state. And also, that's one thing I'd like to change. I would like to change the whole prohibit people from serving who's a convicted felon, because truth be told, the definition of a convicted felon could be anyone who marijuana offenses or putting a literature in the mailbox. I think we should also, I have another suggestion to make sure individuals' cases should be handled privately, but public policy should be handled publicly. And I'm also disagreeing about the districts. I think we should have the board member match the police districts, because that's what we have in the city. And those are my highlights of my suggestion.
Okay, we'll definitely take those into consideration. My section is ended. There'll be a chance for people to ask questions in the open session. Turn it back over to Anna.
Great, thanks, Jamala. So yeah, there will be time, more time, lots of time for questions and comments and your ideas, and all of us are also going to be around at the end of the forum if there are questions remaining. So we've heard a lot about, over and over again, the importance of holding our officials accountable, and I just want to remind folks that we have a list of Twitter handles for at least half of the alder people. Folks can be tweeting at their alder people tonight and in the coming weeks to show how much community support there is behind Board Bill 208 and the companion bills to ensure effective civilian oversight. So one silver lining of the decades that CAPCAR has been seeking civilian oversight, decades, is that we're actually in a position to analyze some 100 similar boards across the country and to try and utilize lessons learned to make the most effective COB possible in St. Louis. And so, for example, there were questions about making a completely independent civilian oversight board to get around this issue of appointment. And one thing learned there is that then they don't have much power. They're not able to access certain records, for example. So there's all of these sort of trade-offs and balances, and CAPCAR has worked really hard for decades to try and get the best thing we can here. Subpoena power has, over and over again we've heard, is the crucial component to having an effective civilian oversight board. And so John Chasnoff will be speaking about the importance of subpoena power and how we're going to work to get there. John is a longtime CAPCAR member, real leader in our group. He also works with the Committee for Prisoners' Rights, does oversight for city jails, is part of Joint 3 St. Louis. And he's actually going to also be taking us through these charts of sort of how the process for how the COB will work once a complaint is submitted. So here's John.
Thanks. Not very often I have a chance to correct Jamala Rogers, but I did want to just make sure that one misperception is not out there. There was a question about screening as part of this application process, and there's really not a screening process at the beginning. Again, this is being worked out, and it's an amendment to the bill that actually Alderwoman Green is proposing. But there wouldn't be a screening process. Anybody can put in an application. Then if the alderperson wants to design some sort of process to get help with that through the neighborhood association or whatever, they might devise some process to start looking at applications. But it's really up to the alderperson to take all the applications, any willing participant, and make some judgments based on that. So I just wanted to clear that, make sure that nobody thought there was a screening process before people got into the system. So first job that I was tasked with was to kind of walk through the procedures for what happens when people file a complaint. And there are really two major components to the Civilian Oversight Board. One is to make recommendations as to policies and procedures. And that's a part of the board that doesn't get much discussion, but it's really one of the crucial powers of the board to look at operations, procedures, policies within the department, and make broad policy recommendations which can really change the whole culture of a department on a policy level. So that's a crucial component, but fairly easy to understand, so we're not going to go into depth on that. The other component of the board is to deal with individual complaints as they're filed. And so I'm going to walk through this process real quickly so folks can understand that. And that's this chart here, and there's one on the other side of the room. So essentially, if you have a complaint of misconduct from the police, you have two places to go to originally file your complaint. You can do it the way it's done now, which is to file your complaint with Internal Affairs, which is a division of the police department. Or you can go to the civilian oversight intake, where we expect there'll be a much friendlier face on the process, much more welcoming process of actually filing your complaint. So from that point, when no matter where the complaint is taken into the system, it goes to Internal Affairs for an investigation. So Internal Affairs will do that initial investigation. The Oversight Board has the ability to monitor those investigations, which means that they can sit in on civilian interviews, and during that process they can suggest questions to the interviewers, hopefully to have some input during the course of those interviews, but so they can monitor those in real time. Along the way, if the Internal Affairs and COB agree, the complaint might be referred for mediation, and that's essentially takes it out of the system into a different process. Lots of times these complaints have to do with rudeness or relatively, minor behaviors where people, thought they weren't handled properly by the police officer, the interaction went wrong, and what they really want to do is sit down and just have a conversation with that officer and try to resolve the problem. So we're hoping that a lot of the complaints can go, a lot of the more minor complaints can go to this mediation process where they're resolved. At that point, if they are resolved, they don't go on the officer's record. That's the end of it. Everybody hopefully goes home happy. If somebody doesn't go home happy from the mediation process, then it comes back down here. So when when an investigation is finished by IAD and they have a recommendation to make, they will send over to COB for review all the information, all the evidence, and their findings as to what they think happened during the course of the incident. The Civilian Oversight Board would review that, and they can send it back to Internal Affairs if they're not happy with the investigation that was done. So, they can say, you forgot to interview this witness, there were questions you didn't ask that witness. All the interviews are taped, so they have all of the interviews on tape so they can see, there was an obvious question you didn't ask, get that witness again and ask the question, or go interview the boyfriend who somehow you mysteriously forgot to talk to. They can send it back repeatedly to get those questions answered. If for some reason Internal Affairs just can't seem to get it right, the review board can vote to do an independent investigation. So at that point then they could call their own witnesses, interview who they want, go out and collect evidence, do an independent review. After the independent investigation is over, they send their recommendation. So this is all staff work. We're not expecting these volunteer folks to be out on the streets doing investigations, involved in the detailed work. We're going to have professional investigators doing that kind of work. So when they make a recommendation, they send their recommendation to the COB board. And they can do the same thing. If they're not happy still with the investigation, they can send it back for more questions. But when they're ready to make a decision, they decide to accept the recommendation of their staff or not to, which means to sustain a complaint or not sustain a complaint. They make a recommendation then to the chief of police as to the discipline that they recommend for the incident if they've found that discipline is appropriate. The chief, again, we have back and forth arrows here with the chief of police, because if the chief accepts the recommendation, fine. If the chief decides that he's not going to go with the recommendation, he likes Internal Affairs recommendation better or whatever, he has to explain that to the Civilian Oversight Board in writing, why he did not accept the recommendation. And that goes into, along with other information, goes into a public report so that the citizens can see that the chief is repeatedly ignoring the Civilian Oversight Board or, legitimately making decisions based on, some sort of thinking that wasn't part of their process. So that's just a quick down and dirty on the various how a complaint gets walked through the system. The other thing I was asked to talk about was the subpoena power. I'm going to see if I can rotate this around without my tape breaking. So subpoena power is really one of the crucial issues, and it keeps coming up over and over, along with the selection process, as one of the crucial issues in all of this. The really important thing to remember is that the goal that we're trying to achieve with subpoena power or with anything else is to get all the evidence. The board can't function properly if it can't get the evidence. So how do you get that evidence to the investigators so they can do their job? Well, first of all, I mentioned the fact that the COB can monitor internal affairs interviews of civilians during the process that they're taking place. They get the videotaped interviews of police officers so that they can watch those interviews and see what went on in the interview. So they have some ways of getting evidence, as that process is going forward. Then there is a requirement in the bill that the police, when they're finished with their investigation, they have to turn over all the evidence to the review board. So, and we tried to make it clear, we don't mean all the documents, we mean all the evidence of any kind, recorded, visual, et cetera, et cetera. Try to close all those loopholes. So, so the board is, as a matter of law, it has the authority to get all the evidence that the police have collected. If they're unhappy with that evidence, they can do the independent investigation and go out and get evidence on their own. So the bill does not have subpoena power in it, and I'll explain that in a second, but it would be very rare occasion when subpoena power would actually have to be used. If the board isn't turning over information, that's a matter of law which hopefully could then be taken to a court and enforced as a matter of law already. So I don't think that they would need the subpoena power to ensure that they get the evidence from the police department. The only time subpoena power would really be necessary is if you're involved in an independent investigation and you want some evidence and you go out to get that evidence and the person who has the evidence is non-compliant. They don't want to just voluntarily turn it over. So let's say there's a gas station videotape that wasn't collected. You go out to get the videotape and the gas station owner says, no, I'm not going to turn it over. Well, only in that situation where you had an independent investigation and a non-compliant owner of some evidence or a witness, only in that situation would subpoena power be necessary. So it would be fairly rare. Nevertheless, we think it's really a crucial power. The reason it's not in the bill proper is that the legal decisions are a little bit mixed, but have seemed to have come down pretty strongly on the side that the Board of Aldermen does not have the authority to legislate subpoena power. It can be granted in two different ways, either by a change in state statute or by a change in the city charter. And Alderman French has been doing a bunch of work on this. Again, the legal opinions are a little muddy, but seems to be leaning on that side that there's those two ways to get subpoena power. So that's why we're proposing a companion bill, which will be following this bill. The subpoena power has to be passed. So what we need to do is have an ordinance that puts the issue of subpoena power on the ballot for the citizens to vote. Then if the citizens approve it as a charter change, that's going to be the process, which is clearly legal, which can't be challenged in court and hold us up for years and years. That's the clear legal process for us to get it. And we think that this has been enough of an issue in the city that it's a winnable campaign, but it's one that's going to have to follow on the heels of our success with the Civilian Oversight Board. So that, I think, covers the issue. I'm going to take questions, and I think Anna's going to help me out by calling on folks.
Great, thanks, John. So again, we're taking questions specifically about this process and about subpoena power, and other general questions and comments will be later. Yes?
I was wondering what the selection process for the professional investigators is. So
The next section is going to be on the department and some of that hiring and firing. We do have some restrictions on who gets hired and a whole process for how that hiring happens, but Johnson will cover that.
Okay, it sounds like a good start, but the problem is brutality, murder, and some severe crimes. Usually the police cover themselves with law. So it don't appear that you have a whole lot of leeway with the law, because what they say, the reason they kill you, it was law. You resisted, so we got a right to kill you. So how would subpoena power, how effective would subpoena power be in that case? Because when these cases, that's what brings me here. I'm in the middle of that right now. So when they, little stuff, that's something different. Okay, a cop cursed you out, or he wrote you a ticket you didn't like, or whatever the case may be. Yeah, okay, you can go through this and you probably apologize. But what brings us here is brutality, murder. So in them cases, they cover themselves very well with law. They say, we have a right. Missouri state law says, if you resist, you can be still a lollipop. We can shoot you and kill you because you was threatening.
So I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that Anna said at the very beginning was civilian oversight is not the magic bullet. There are a whole host of reforms that are evident to all of us as being necessary. This cannot cure all the problems. There is huge problems with police having levels of immunity. There are the laws that are designed to, like you say, to protect them in those cases. A review board's not going to be able to find contrary to the law. There are problems that have to be solved in other ways, and that's, this is not going to take care of everything. What I think it does do, besides finding individual problem officers, is that the number of complaints tend to go way up because the process is more friendly. So you begin to get more accurate data about what's actually happening in the police department. And that data needs to be fed into an early warning system that finds problem officers. The transparency aspect of us finally learning what's going on in our police department and getting data. Those are some of the ways that oversight boards help when they don't necessarily convict. Steve?
My interpreter is going to be voicing for me. So back to the comment that you just made, I would like to make this addition. So I would say that each of the police officers in any district, they all need to be evaluated, assessed, just make sure that they're not abusing their powers and those type of things. So the the investigations need to come from the top down. For example, the idea of, and make sure that they're trained as well. When you have a driver's license that has J88 on it, most police officers are not familiar with what that means, and that means that the person who they've taken the driver's license from is deaf. So that's an issue as well. They need to be trained in that. And I just have a long list of things that they need to be trained on. There's a lot of issues for deaf and for hearing people, and I think the police need to be reviewed. Review the police officer's history. If they have had abuse or abuse of the law or abuse of citizens in the past, then maybe they need to go. And maybe if those abuses are not too egregious, maybe they just need to be trained.
Okay, so I would respond in two ways. One is that your question gets to the whole other part of the review board that I said at first, which is the ability to audit policies, procedures, and operations. That includes training and make recommendations for how you can change the police department as a whole. So you can hardly blame an individual officer who hasn't been properly trained. And if there's no policy on the books, an appropriate policy on the books, then he has no guidelines to follow. So that is one of the important roles of a civilian oversight board, is to do those audits of policies, procedures, and operations and make the changes that are necessary. And again, I point to the early warning system, which is greatly enhanced by civilian oversight and the data that gets plugged into them. The early warning system is really the best way to see an officer who has a pattern of problems and make sure that officer's behavior is either corrected or he's fired, whatever's necessary. But that includes frequent resisting arrest, frequent missing work, and a high number of complaints. There's a lot of things that are kind of factors, categories in the early warning systems that are designed to point out those problem officers.
So I think
So like the red flag type of thing?
Yes.
Is what you're talking about? Good deal.
Okay, we're going to move on in the program, but please save your questions to open forum when there will be time to air any questions remaining, well, as much time as we have for more questions. But I do want to give time for remaining speakers. Johnson Lancaster will be speaking again about the proposed companion bill to establish a new Department of Civilian Oversight to preserve some independence of the COB, and also to make sure that we have a director with the appropriate skills and necessary control over the budgetary process. So here he is.
Okay, where does the COB fit now that the city is establishing real local control of the police department? The COB structure would be a quasi-independent, quasi-autonomous entity. We looked at placing it under the Board of Aldermen, but that was unworkable. The city charter places boards and commissions under the mayor. Also, the charter states that the police department is overseen by the Director of Public Safety. So really, the only logical place we could see it right now is under Public Safety. The Civilian Oversight Board would be under the Department of Public Safety, and the Director of Public Safety would hire the Civilian Oversight Board Executive Director according to the current version of the bill. My understanding is there's a committee substitute that makes other suggestions. The Director of Public Safety hires with approval of the COB members. Then the Executive Director hires the COB staff, and the COB Executive Director and staff serve the Civilian Oversight Board. So we also have a companion bill to Board Bill 208 that would create a new city department of civilian oversight. And the office must do community education about its operations and also issue annual reports that pretty much give an idea of what the progress of the COB is in completing their function. So that's about it on that end. Are there any questions related to this?
I was thinking maybe the COB could merge with internal affairs. My concern is where are we going to get money to have an external investigation and hire these people to do an external investigation as professional as
My understanding that's going to be appropriated in the budget of the Civilian Oversight Board.
how much would this cost?
We have no idea at this point.
And I'm being reminded that there's actually on the last page, I guess, of the multi-page handout you got, there's some information on that. I also want to remind everyone of our rules about trying to make sure that everyone has gotten a chance to speak once before people speak multiple times. Are there other people who have questions, specifically with regard to Department of Civilian Oversight?
I talked to some people in the 6th Ward, and they tell me, and I know this is really not currently Sorry? No, not particularly, no. Can I ask the same people who are working on this?
Would that be a question you could speak to? Maybe that's, oh, sorry, sir.
I was asking because the same people who are working on this will probably be most likely able to work on that.
Okay, thank you. So that actually might be a question or something that the next speaker, Alderman French, could speak to. It looks like there aren't any more questions for this section, which is good because it'll give us more time in the open forum where people can bring lots of ideas and questions. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to Alderman Alderman Antonio French, who's actually sponsoring the bill, spent all day in committee, and is going to say a few words before our open forum.
Good evening. Hello, everybody. Good. So, as you may have heard, we had a very long committee hearing today where we discussed Board Bill 208 and also possible amendments to the bill. It was actually the committee's first opportunity to discuss the bill among ourselves and to discuss some of the ideas of possible changes. We find ourselves in a situation where we are trying to get the strongest possible bill passed this session while we still have momentum. And as a result, we're going to have a bill that probably not everyone will be happy with. There will be people who feel that whatever version of the bill passed does not go strong enough or far enough. There will be those that feel that, in fact, it goes too far and is not needed at all. At the end of the day, we have to get 15 votes to get anything passed. We have 29 members of the board, 28 aldermen, 1 president of the board. And we had, as of yesterday, the mayor threatening to veto anything that is too strong, specifically anything that gave subpoena power. And frankly, that scared a lot of folks who were on the fence about the bill in the first place. So, as it is right now, the only version of the bill in front of the Public Safety Committee is the original 208. The committee substitute has not been formally taken up, although we did indirectly discuss all the changes. First, just let me do a poll here. How many people have read the Board Bill 208? Good. It's important to be informed and to know exactly what we're talking about, because it is the language that's in the bill that matters. It is the difference between the mays and the shalls, the whereases, and the actual law part. And so the specific or the wording matters. What we find across the country is that civilian oversight boards are most effective when they have input from all sides and when they have both sides or all sides, including and especially the executive of the city, supporting it. It is hard, and a lot of the questions that we've had tonight about the bill is how do we get around the mayor, or how do we force the mayor to do this, or how do we take the mayor out of the equation? That is very tough, if not impossible. The first thing is that elections matter. They matter a lot. And even the language, even the strongest possible language we put in this bill, there will still be 100 silent, invisible ways that the chief executive of the city can try to stifle the committee. And so it is always going to require us to hold not only the police accountable, but also the mayor, the chief, the alderman. There will be no perfect bill that we pass where we can just pat ourselves on the back and say, okay, that's done, and just leave it on autopilot. We're always going to have to be making this thing stronger and making sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. So with that said, I do want to take some questions. If you have questions about the specific bill, the political process, I see Elizabeth Vega back there. So today was our first opportunity to discuss the current version of the bill and possible changes. The committee chair, Alderman Kennedy, has called for another meeting Monday at 10 a.m. And I think between now and then, we will come up with whatever the version is going to be that we vote on. And so what we might propose is breaking it up to a bunch of proposed amendments and letting people vote them up or down on the committee. But I think come Monday, we're going to have whatever the final version is, and we'll try to get it passed this session.
You asked how many people had read the bill. Where is the bill in its current state that can be read? Where is it?
Board Bill 208 in its current state is available on the city's website. You can either go to the public safety, it's Board Bill 208, so the website is actually pretty easy to pull it up, but you can go to the Public Safety Committee and it has a list of all of the bills that we're seeing. You can go to my name and it's under there. So Board Bill 208 is the actual bill. Yes, sir?
Mr. President, I'm a little confused on how funding is going to be assured. Is it that if we have the Department of Public Safety and the Police Department under it, and this department is under, everyone wants money.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any funding defined here.
So first, it gets back to the point. I don't know if everybody heard the question. The question is, how do you assure funding for this office, for this board? The way the board bill is written now, it is up to the public safety director to include it in his overall budget for the public safety department, which is actually the largest budget item that we consider the public safety department. And this is one of those situations, again, where we can make it as tight as we want, but it still gives authority and power to the executive branch to create the budget. So the number of investigators, how much the director gets paid, will ultimately be decided by how much is included in that line item for this department. Yeah, there's just no way to get around that one. Now, I will say this, though, is that whatever it costs, it will cost a fraction of what we have spent dealing with the unrest of the last few months. The city of St. Louis has already spent over $1 million. We've spent over $1 million policing outside of the city of St. Louis, sending people to Ferguson and St. Louis County. So this would be a very good investment on our part. If it was $200,000, $250,000, whatever that would be, it would be a very good investment on our part. And the entire budget would come to the Ways and Means Committee. Several of us sit on the Ways and Means Committee, and we'll be very careful to look for that line item to make sure it's funded adequately. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I just want to know if there's an example of where COB and IA investigation was both presented to the grand jury, the different ways of people.
I don't know of any case like that, and in this specific, in this bill, either version, all proposals so far, the recommendations would just go to the chief or to the executive branch. I don't know if they would be available as evidence or anything like that. So I don't know of any specific cases. The hook is being pulled, so.
Well, you stay here. We don't have to stay here.
Oh, yeah,
no,
sure.
I mean that you'll stay and keep answering
okay.
questions.
Sure.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alderman French. So we're going to move now into the open forum, and Alderman French and all the other speakers are going to be here still to answer more questions. So so hold on to them. We're meanwhile going to be passing some green buckets to collect some donations, if you can, for the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression. We literally have $0 as of printing these nice things, beautiful things in our account. So if you can, it's appreciated. So questions on anything that's been talked about so far, or anything else, or your comments are also welcome. Janie, is there something administrative or?
No, I had a question about what response you're getting to the about the criteria that part of testing in terms of the application process, because we really want to see representation about who is most affected by the police brutality, obviously.
So the question was about application process?
Yes.
And I think she's more asking about the criteria that CAPCAR has supplemented, that's not a part of the board bill, but that what we think is important. So that includes ensuring that, there's demographics that reflect the city, immigrants, LGBT folks, that kind of thing.
Well, I think someone else could probably speak better to the CAPCAR recommendations. One of my concerns that I raised about the current version of the bill was that it still gives ultimate authority, even outside of the nomination process, to the mayor to choose who he would like to. He can ignore those nominees, and that's a concern, and I think that is an opportunity for us to tighten that language up. Alderwoman Green had made a suggestion at the committee hearing today about some language to tighten that up, and I think that will be a step in the right direction.
All right, other questions? Especially from people who haven't spoken yet. I haven't kept track. Yes? What's actually behind you? Yes, yes, you who stood up in the hat.
I have a question and a comment. So the way that it's structured now, COB can monitor interviews of civilians, but not of police officers. Is that the case? And then comment, even though I know Alderman French is sympathetic to this based on what he said in the hearing today, but the Post-Dispatch put out an article today saying from legal experts that they could institute subpoena power and that it might go unchallenged. And especially if the board is elected, subpoena power would not be an issue.
I'm sorry, the question was about subpoena power?
Well, the first question was if the COB can monitor interviews of civilians but not of police officers.
Right. So in the current version of the bill, the COB could not interview the accused officer, and I think it actually says it could not interview police department employees. So that is a concern. It's an opportunity for us to tighten that language up. That might be one of the proposed amendments that we would do separately and see how the committee votes on that. We just want to try to get the strongest language possible. At the end of the day, the current version of Board Bill 208 has enough co-sponsors to pass. We have a few weeks to see if we can get a few more things added to it and still keep enough votes to pass it, but that's the challenge. That's just the politics of it.
And I just wanted to speak to that for a second too. Some of this is the give and take of the legislative process, and you have to get to 15 votes. That was one of the issues. That was not in our original draft of a bill, but in the process of negotiation and winning votes, that was one of the provisions that was put in. With Antonio, I'd like to see it strengthened. But one of the reasons we were able to give a little on that point is that we do have access, that we require that all interviews be videotaped and that the videotapes be turned over. So it's not like we have no access to see what happened in that police interview. And there's also, and this was raised in the hearing today, there are very strict Supreme Court rulings around police officers having to testify because of their own Fifth Amendment right not to testify against themselves. They're required to testify to internal affairs as a condition of their employment in violation of, they have to testify against themselves to internal affairs, but it can't be used in court. But that only applies to internal affairs. Whether you can stretch that to them having to testify before a COB is a complex Supreme Court type level decision. So that's where these issues lie, and where we were happy enough that we, at least we could get the videotapes of those interviews.
Back there.
Is it set in stone that the age limit has raised to 25?
No, in the current version, the question was about whether the age limit has been raised. In the version we discussed today, the possible substitution, it was raised to 25, but in the current version that is actually in front of the board, it remains at 18.
So I want to first say thank you to John for bringing up why subpoena is not in the bill, because I think that's something that's been talked a lot about why the problem with the bill. But I want to challenge the idea that subpoena would be rarely used or rarely necessary, because I think exactly for the kinds of situations that we've seen recently of murders and brutality, we know that the police are actually not interviewing all the people at the scene at the time of the incident. And so I feel like for those types of things, the subpoena power is essential to be able to go out and find all those witnesses and get them in, that the investigator has that subpoena power if someone is feeling any sort of resistance to coming forward at that point. And I wonder if the other members of the panel agree with John's assessment that it would be rarely used, because I challenge that. I think it would be an essential component and would actually, in some of the more high-profile cases that this gentleman was referring to, would be used on a fairly regular basis.
So one thing about the subpoena power, and it is a complicated legal argument and disagreement. And so in our conversation with the Attorney General actually cited the exact case that the City Councilor cited, and the City Councilor cited the case saying that this is proof that we cannot have or give a body subpoena power. The Attorney General cited the same case to say it is an example that we can give subpoena power, and this is why. The case is Barber versus Jackson Ethics. The difference in the case is that this new entity that they created could not only just investigate but also punish. And the court ruled that by doing that, you were basically replicating the duties of the judicial. If this body is just investigating and then only turning those over to the chief, the Attorney General argued that you're not replicating that, and in fact, in the decision, the judges actually determined that they could do that, except that they overstepped and then tried to punish. So if I could have my way, I would like to see us put it in the bill, pass it, and actually work this out in court, because ultimately that's where it's going to have to be decided. The courts are going to have to rule on that specific thing, and I think we would win, frankly.
I just wanted to say something about that question, because I think it's an important question, and to speak to your concern, because I'm also with the Organization for Black Struggle. For many years, we actually dealt with police brutality cases. In fact, there were times when we went to a scene and did question the witnesses and even did like reenactments. And before we could even finish, the police were on air saying it was a justifiable homicide. So I'm feeling you right there, and I don't know if too many groups that took on that road, maybe the NAACP did, but seeing mothers crying about their child and knowing that the police had already said it's justified because we felt threatened, we did all of that. We are trying to address some of those issues, but the bottom line is going to be that this is one piece of it, and I think John might have said something about it, but there's also other efforts that are underway for the Quality Policing Initiative that the Organization for Black Strugglers have. So there's going to be like different avenues that we're going to have to make these folks accountable. This is just one way, because we all know police officers. They live, some of them live in our community, others chose not to. But ultimately, they need to be mindful that we are the folks who pay their salaries, and the deal is that they're going to have to be responsive. Now, the people that are going to have to make that clear, we're going to have to make that clear to the alder people. Because already we've been told that the Police Officers Association is bearing down hard on some of the South Side alder people to get them to not support this. But they're like one vote just like you all are. And so that's why it's important for us to keep the pressure on at all these levels to make sure that there's accountability at all levels.
And Steve, you raise a point that reminds me of another provision in the bill. There is a provision there that says that when a use of deadly force happens, the
COB would be notified immediately and be able to roll out to the scene. So they could start to collect that information. I hear you too about what you're saying about the subpoena power in those situations. Once the police start intimidation, you can bring a witness in, but you can't get them to talk. So I really think the solution to that particular problem has to do with getting at the policies and practices that stop the police intimidation to the extent we can.
I'm wondering if you could speak to, if my memory serves, from 8 years ago, hearing testimony at City Hall that Internal Affairs had a pretty dismal record of referring citizen complaints against police for action. Do you have any data on that as to what kind of statistics exist from Internal Affairs?
not much. And that's because even now, I think people have heard as these killings are happening all over the country, that one of the things that's missing, and not just St. Louis, but you can't get an accurate count of police killings. Nowhere. And that's because the Police Officers Association has, you know, put the pressure on folks that we don't want to be accountable. There's not an accurate count anywhere, even in St. Louis. So what we're trying to do is to make that information be, by law, you have to collect, but not only that, you have to include it in a report so that everybody knows what happened. And right now, if you go to Internal Affairs, it would be hard to get an accurate picture of what happened, because it looks like it was rosy. There was no assaults, no complaints. We're doing fine. We're going to have to change all of that.
I don't have any data on the percentage of cases that are turned over, but I do have some data about the number of complaints. Internal Affairs in the City of St. Louis over the last 3 years internally initiated, so that's actually police reporting themselves or a commander reporting. It's roughly about 200 per year. It got down to about 203 in 2014. Externally initiated, that's complaints from citizens. 2012 it was 98. 2013 it was 95, and this is correct. We checked. In 2014 there were only 57, so it dropped almost in half for some reason last year.
So, and Marlene, I think the case you were referring to, there was a federal court case here where the judge looked at 5 years of records on complaints about physical abuse. And I might be off by a number or two, but it was essentially I think it was 303 complaints over the 5-year period on physical abuse and 1 sustained. So the judge ruled that the police board was turning a blind eye to the problem.
I'm just the facilitator, but I do want to say one thing. You know, we all know that there were many more than 57 incidents of police brutality last year. And so, you know, as we're talking about the COB and wanting it to be perfect, I think, you know, we're hearing over and over again that COB is one pressure point of many, that we need to keep the pressure up. But the hope is that with a COB, there's going to be a lot more than 57 complaints, because there's going to be somewhere where people can go. There's going to be people listening and people keeping track, and that just begins our ability to start having this kind of accountability. Let's see. And I just want to remind folks, you know, if you're holding back, this is a time you can step up and you can ask anything in the open space. Yeah? Oh, okay. It's actually the person behind you. Go ahead.
So just speaking to what you were talking about a minute ago, with like if there's an incident where there's a police involved shooting, that the COB would be able to independently, or at least go to the scene and kind of collect evidence as well. Is that going to deter them from immediately making claims of that it was justified? And you know, because we're talking like an hour and a half after Ladarius Blaine was murdered, they're already on the news saying that it's justified, and like, would that deter them from immediately making statements like that until there was more investigation? Is that making sense what I'm getting at? Yeah.
There's language in the bill that tells the police that they need to refrain from making those judgments until the process is run its course.
All right. Directly behind the woman who just asked a question.
So my question was about if we can't, if police don't have to testify in front of the group, I noticed the change in the narrative, like with the Mike Brown thing. Like at the beginning it was one thing, and then like at the end it was something completely different, because we had all this information. Like how we put a check and balance where we know the report that they are giving when it initially happened is the one that goes to court. You know, not to violate their right to, you know, not incriminate themselves, but also that the report that we are, you know, that's entered into evidence is accurate.
that goes back to the videotape, you know, it goes back to the need for body cameras, things that are kind of outside, things that are out, some of these things are outside the realm of the COB, but the fact that the videotape interview would be preserved and in the hands of, you know, civilian folks, I think would force them then to stick with the particular story once they've told it. I'm in favor of body cameras along with a bunch of policies to protect us from them, but I think, you know, body cameras, getting more and more data on what's happened initially is really the only way to keep them, you know, on the straight and narrow.
I appreciate you guys including myself.
Speak up.
I appreciate the forum so I can be educated on the issue. My question is, I know Alderman Antonio has spoken on right now that there seems to be a good amount of individuals down at City Hall that are brought to the table in the past. Clearly, the community wants some ideas and wants something to be solved. So as this process goes on, I like to go to things like learn and also take it and do something about it. So the way as the process goes on, that we need to see contact us or CAFCO or the alderman or whatever, figure out a way to put pressure on our older person to know who's with it and who thinks it.
Yeah, so especially over the next few days, as we are working out the exact language that the committee is going to vote on, I would suggest that you go to the website, the City of St. Louis website, Alderman website, pull up the list of the public safety members, and make calls to each of those members, as many as you can. Send in emails, I see the Twitter accounts are listed, and let your voice be heard. Today, we had a committee hearing. The room was not as full as it was before. We have another committee hearing that we'll actually be voting on something Monday at 10 a.m. I would hope that folks are there and at least expressing support for the individual changes that they like to see. But now is the time. So just let people know that you're watching.
Is that going to be an open hearing?
It won't be available for public comment.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. People can be there to watch, but you won't be able to say anything. But the other part of it, as this open session comes to a close, we're going to break into those COB districts, and then we'll be trying to drill down a little bit about what people can actually do between now and when that bill passes.
And while there won't be public comment at the committee hearing, both at 10 a.m. Monday and 10 a.m. tomorrow at the Board of Aldermen, you can have a little conversation with aldermen in the hallway on the way to the board meeting, but those one-on-one encounters matter. Be respectful, let your opinion be known, but those do matter. People need to hear face-to-face that you support a stronger version of the bill.
Yeah, and there's no question that this is about holding our officials accountable, and the more we're able to do that, the more powerful we are, and the better a bill we can get. So this is the time to step up. This is a time to make your voices heard. Twitter handles are on the wall. You can take them with you and hopefully use them. We'll be emailing out. Make sure that you signed up when you came in. Also, and again, we will be splitting into district groups. I am a Palestine activist, and I just got involved with CAPCAR a couple years ago. And there's it's a small group of people. So if you want to make this better and you want to be a part of this, there's room for you. So it's about stepping up and getting involved. Let's get one more question, then we are gonna break into groups so we can look at where we're going from here on a even more local level. I'm sorry if you had your hand up and you never got called. I'm gonna.
Real quick, I think I know the answer to this, but Alderman French, are you still accepting written statements from those that did not get to speak publicly at the last?
Those of us who are discriminated
Yeah, I'm
against
sure
and locked
the
out
chairman would take
because
a
your door was
written
locked.
statement.
Obviously, I'm going to use that Alderman, but should I also send it to Terry Kennedy?
I was locked out.
Yeah, and I would advise emailing it to all the members of the committee.
To sign up.
All right, Jamala says we have room for more, so that's all I need to hear. There was one here, remember?
I don't see why we have to have the police report how many killings are happening. I don't know why we can't keep track of that ourselves, about our own communities.
I can't see.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's That's okay, thank you.
And I think that, this,
Could you start your question or your comment? Just start again.
I'm sorry, what?
Could you back up? Repeat, just
Okay.
repeat. Reiterate.
Okay. I don't know why we have to, the police report, how many killings are happening. I don't know why we can't keep track of that ourselves. And I think that this is all great, but that there should also be a completely independent, civil oversight board, just the people who, when something happens, they go in, they talk to everybody, they make the complete interviews themselves, they report to the public themselves. We have the power.
Thank you. So was there any way, could you keep your hand up if you haven't spoken yet tonight? Yes, sir.
One thing just occurred to me, I'm just gonna vote this out. When the police shoot somebody, what about getting in the ambulance if the person should get shot?
No kidding. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've been speaking with somebody who's on a civilian oversight board in a different city, and he has a horror story. He says basically the city just systematically took all the power away from the citizen oversight board. So now they're trying to backtrack and see how they can fix this, and what they've come up with is like a personal liability insurance for the police officers, to where it also gives a separate investigation from the insurance company for like risk management. And then that would also keep officers from bouncing from department to department, because the more complaints you have, your premiums would go up basically, and then eventually you would become uninsurable. And like a good driver's premiums would go down, the officer's premiums would also go down, and the base fee would be paid by the police department itself. And I was wondering if you guys had any ideas on that?
Yeah, what we found out, because St. Louis was probably one of the last cities to get civilian oversight, we had a chance of looking at all of the other ones, and most of them are defunct, underfunded, understaffed, and so those were the things that we try to also incorporate in the bill to counteract that. But the bottom line is, it's about citizen participation. So for example, I think maybe Alderman French even said that, like once it gets passed, we can't go back into our cubby holes and say, phew, we did that. Because that's what happened in those other places. And then while our backs were turned, they like systematically either started the defunding process, or they started like policies that, would prevent the board from being effective. But the interesting thing now that's happening with all of the police violence around the country, and Ferguson and St. Louis being lifted up, there's more interest now in making those COBs that have been defunct more accountable. And folks are now looking to us and saying, what are you all doing? Can we use what you all used? So that, I'm glad to see that, because for years people have just said, I guess we don't have anything. But again, these are our folks, y'all. These are people that we're paying. We can't let them run amok and just throw up our hands, especially when they're killing people with no, immunity. So I think what we have here is a golden opportunity to start a wave of really rethinking and revisiting civilian oversight in other places. And so we're still learning, and there's going to be, when we institute this and get it implemented, we'll probably see some places where we could strengthen it, and maybe in a couple of years, maybe come back to the board for additional laws or those kinds of things. But it's not a done deal. This is going to be a process in motion that we want as much participation as possible. And it's only going to work if we stay on the case.
All right, so I think we're going to have to move on, just so that we're out of here in time, because we want to make sure we have time for breakout groups, so don't go anywhere. We're going to be breaking up into the 7 COB districts for a time to sort of check in with each other, folks in your same district, lay out some of the tasks ahead of you. As you've heard over and over and over again, this is not about coming to a forum and listening and hoping things work out. It's really about community engagement. So the next part of the forum is splitting into these groups, then we'll be coming back together again. To find out the different, looks like people are getting up to leave, and that's not the idea. To get an understanding of the tasks ahead, and then to plug into the much needed work to make sure that civilian oversight is effective, and understand some of the next steps leaving here today. So we got 7 people representing the 7 districts. There's a map in your handout so you can see which district you're in. You'll see each district basically has 4 wards in them. And if you have any questions, you can refer to that map or ask one of us. But let's have District 1 over in this corner, District 2, District 3, so I'm going basic clockwise here. District 4 in the back near the clock, District 5 in that corner, District 6 near this map, and then District 7 near the podium. And then we're going to have about 15 minutes and come back together for the closing.
Okay, I don't live in any of those districts. I guess I'm gonna go ahead and shut down the stream for right now, and then I'll come back up when they come back in like 15 minutes. So I'll be back in a little while. Bye bye.